Welcome to this Brexit Your Questions Answered. We're building up to 11 o'clock tonight, of course, the moment the UK leaves the European Union. And joining me to answer some of the questions you've been sending us about changes are Maddy Thimont Jack from the Institute for Government and Jill Rutter from UK in Changing Europe, a think tank. Thank you both for coming in. So, big list of questions. Let's start with you, Maddy. And this question is from Nick, who says, will free movement continue after the transition period, or will we need visas?
So the government has said that their policy is to leave the EU single market, so we will no longer have free movement at the end of the transition period. In terms of whether we need visas, there's going to be negotiations about how sort of short-term travel will be managed between the EU and the UK, but also in terms of working abroad, it is probably likely that some kind of visa will be needed, but all of that is up for negotiation this year.
And Jill, coming to you, a question from Malcolm Newton on, well, Maddy just touched on there for a moment, UK residents who work in the EU, what is being done to safeguard them in respect of travel, taxation and the continued ability to work?
So just as the UK has introduced this settled status scheme for EU citizens living in the UK now, other member states are all protecting, they're all obliged under the withdrawal agreement to protect the rights of UK citizens who are already there or who moved there during this year. So things should continue as normal, but there is issues to come up. You know, as Maddy said, question, do we have any sort of, you know, how easy is it to go and work in Europe after the end of the year? And secondly, some of those people sort of, you know, might want to move to another European country. That was something that the UK wanted sorted out in phase one, that if you're already in, say, working in Germany, you'd be able to move and go and work in the Netherlands. But that was something that Europe said, no, that's not a phase one issue, that's a phase two issue. So we haven't got any assurance on what's called onward movement yet. So for those people who are there now, should stay pretty much as is, but they might have to go through some formalities. You know, as we're getting people to apply for settled status, they might need to apply for to secure their status in those EU countries.
Thank you. And Maddy, back to you. Lance Greenwood, when we leave the EU, are we still covered by the European Convention on Human Rights?
Yeah, so the Council of Europe, which is a different organisation to the EU, we are still a member of the Council of Europe. We are still sort of governed at the moment anyway by the European Court of Human Rights. There's a question about whether the UK government might want to sort of leave that. But from the EU side, we're going to be negotiating how we cooperate in areas of criminal justice and policing cooperation. And the EU have said that actually UK's continued membership of that convention and sort of oversight of that court is going to be a prerequisite to allow close cooperation in that area. So it's not quite clear what the current UK government wants to do on that. Theresa May actually did commit to continuing to be a member, but that's likely to be something that will come up in the conversations, particularly around those security issues.
Jill, will the quality of goods and services be reduced in trade deals, asks Suhail Yusuf.
So there's a bit of a debate at the moment about what do we sign up in new trade deals. I think the answer is not necessarily. It depends on what we agree. At the moment, we're committed to EU product standards. It's possible that in new trade deals, we agree not necessarily lower quality, but different product standards in those deals. It's quite interesting. We have lots and lots of debates about, you know, the famous chlorinated chicken, those American chickens. The Americans would say, well, actually, our chickens are as safe to eat as UK chickens, European chickens. The difference is not actually the standard of the good, it's about how it's produced, and that's likely to be another issue in those trade talks. So I'd say not necessarily, but wait to see. But it may be harder for UK to export, and there may be less choice. That's the other possibility if trade becomes more restricted.
Diana Burgess, the question for you, Maddy. She's got a personal question. I've been given a settled status, but without that, that's in the UK, obviously, but without any document to prove this, will I experience difficulties in, say, convincing the NHS that I'm eligible for free treatment?
So the way that the UK government has decided to implement this settled status scheme is that you can register for settled status, and then what you get is a sort of code that you can share with relevant government departments or sort of hospitals or when you're applying for jobs to prove that you do have settled status. So you can access that code through gov.uk if you have the sort of relevant documents that you use to apply for settled status. And that is one of the key ways that EU citizens will be able to prove their rights to stay here. There was a bit of a debate. A lot of people wanted actually to have some more physical documentation, sort of physical proof, but that is how the government chose to do it. So check on gov.uk and then you can hopefully find that code that you can share.
And talking about citizens living abroad again, but not in the EU this time, this is Samantha Hazelwood, who is a British citizen living in Barbados, Jill. And she's asking, how does Brexit affect citizens residing overseas? What happens to our passports? Currently, they're inclusive of the EU. Will we have a standalone one?
So they will get to be eligible for British passports as they are now, but obviously that British passports will bring fewer rights, because as Maddy said, we'll lose our rights at the end of the year to move under free movement rules into other EU countries. So if your questioner, Samantha, is planning on leaving Barbados and moving to the south of France or somewhere like that, she would be able to do that now with her British passport. She may not necessarily be able to do that after the end of the year.
Tom Gaffney, one for you, Maddy. Will arrangements for transporting pets to the EU change during and after the transition period?
Yeah, so pets has obviously become quite a big topic of conversation during the Brexit process. But basically, during transition, the sort of process will continue as is the case now. So you have to take the same steps you would normally have to do to be able to take your pets into the EU. There's a question mark about what will happen at the end of transition. This is going to be something that presumably will come up in the negotiations with the EU. But I mean, the government is already starting to publish guidance on gov.uk about what you need to do to prepare for January 2021. So I'd recommend looking at that to see if there's any steps that people need to start taking before the end of December to make sure they can continue to take their pets into the EU next year.
Sounds like good advice. And last question for you, Jill, from David Kazumi. What will happen to workers' rights after Brexit?
It'll be a matter for the UK government in two respects. One of which is, does it sign up to any provisions in either the deal with the EU or with anyone else, committing us to something on workers' rights? We don't know that yet. Government hasn't said it will do that. It's going to be a big EU demand, though. In those trade negotiations, we talk about the thing they call level playing field provisions. One of the areas is they're a bit worried that we might row back on workers' rights and try and undercut the European social model. So we may decide to negotiate something in there as a price of getting better access to the EU market. We may decide not to. But then in the long term, it'll be for our elected MPs in Parliament to decide. You just heard your respondent in the pub in Kettering saying, he actually wanted UK accountable politicians to be making these decisions. So if you're worried about what happens in workers' rights, you'll need to pay attention to British politics and vote for MPs you think represent your views.
And we're out of time, but thank you both, Maddy and Jill. Hugely informative. I need to get your mobile numbers so we can post them, and all the viewers can put you on speed dial. I understand why you're shaking your head, but great. Come again.